Hey, can't you make this food taste better? It tastes a little off. Come on, make something better. Shouldn't a housewife be able to cook like we're eating out at a restaurant?
No, this is normal. Your taste buds are just too refined because you always eat at fancy restaurants. I'm the one who needs a break from this. 3 months into marriage, I've been enduring such complaints every day. My husband, Tony, expects way too much from me when it comes to the housework I do. He's never satisfied, even though I think I do a decent job.
Stretch the bed sheets tighter, like they do in hotels. You really suck at housework, don't you?
The dream image my husband has is a classy, tidy, and elegant space, like the ones in fancy restaurants and hotels. It's far too much to expect from me. Unless we had a maid, there's no way someone as busy as me could do all that. If you're being picky about it, then why don't you do it yourself? Whenever I say this, my husband becomes quiet. He knows he can't manage the housework on his own, but he keeps forcing me to do it in his way, and I was getting really frustrated whenever he did that. Oh no, I left my wallet at home to go shopping. Am I too tired these days? On my way to the grocery, I realized I'd forgotten my wallet and returned home, where I heard strange noises from the living room. Huh? Is that Tony's voice? And who's he with? Just as I was about to take off my shoes, I noticed unfamiliar shoes at the entrance. Pumps? Are these women's shoes? Hearing my husband's voice mixed with a woman's and their embarrassing sounds echoing to the entrance, I quietly moved towards the living room. I caught my husband cheating with his mistress. What are you doing, you jerk? He recorded a video of my husband's affair without him noticing and sent it to our relatives. So my father-in-law messaged me on WhatsApp, and I stormed into the room where my husband and his mistress, Jane, were. I had my phone out and everything.
Hey, what are you doing?
I'm live streaming this to all our relatives.
Stop it, what are you doing?
Minutes later, my father-in-law and my father arrived at the scene, turning the whole thing into an absolute disaster for my husband. My name is Angela, and I'm 39 years old. Being part of a family full of civil servants, they always said I should be one too. So I studied a lot to pass the civil service exam. My father is a managing director at the city hall, and I was directed to work there by him. Working hard, I now hold a managerial position. But up until now, I was all about school and work, not really knowing much about dating and living on my own for ages. Now, my younger sister, who is 3 years younger than me, has gotten married and moved into our family home, so I rented an apartment nearby. But one day...
Excuse me, you dropped your wallet.
Oh, thank you very much. I got my wallet back from a random guy by the store I popped into on my way home from work. I didn't think much of it until I got home and found a note in it.
I'm waiting for your call.
Along with his name, there was also a phone number written on the note, and I had never experienced anything like this in my life. Hello, are you the person who found my wallet?
Yes, thank you for calling. I never thought you'd actually call.
Thank you for that time. Why did you do this?
When I saw you as I picked up your wallet, you were so beautiful. It was love at first sight. I couldn't say that at first, so I did this in a rush. Sorry, and thank you.
The man was surprised by my call and tried to hang up, not expecting me to actually reach out. He probably didn't know what to do. Please wait. Now that we're connected, may I thank you properly? With a slightly frightened voice, he agreed, and we decided to have lunch together the following Saturday. Thank you so much for that time. I don't know what I would have done if nobody had handed my wallet over.
No, I'm glad to hear you say that.
Are you nervous?
Yes.
His name was Tony, and he was older than me, at 42, having never been in a relationship and living as a bachelor. He worked as a plumber and lived alone, enjoying his carefree daily routine, eating out, and not worrying about money. He honestly shared his feelings, saying it was his first time falling in love at first sight, and he was glad he had impulsively put his number and message in my wallet. I see, but talking with you, Tony, is quite interesting. At that time, I found Tony's stories about his completely different life environment intriguing and never boring. In fact, I even found his company enjoyable. From then on, we started to contact each other whenever something happened. Before I knew it, Tony had started to stay at my apartment. A few months later, we decided to get married.
I can't believe Tony found such a beautiful wife like you. It's really great. I know my son is a bit foolish, but please take good care of him.
That's what my father-in-law said when we greeted each other. I felt guilty for having assumed that Tony's family wasn't wealthy based on his appearance and demeanor. Tony's family home was actually quite large and impressive. Hey, what did your dad do? He has a pretty impressive house.
My dad? He was a police officer, a strict one at that. I hated him and always rebelled against him.
A police officer? Wow, that's impressive.
Not really. Try living with him in the family, it's annoying.
At that moment, I couldn't understand my husband's point of view. To me, having a police officer as a father seemed strong and reliable, right? Oh, I see. That was all I could reply at the time, and then our married life began. However, this marriage turned into a hellish life beyond imagination due to my husband's excessive ideals about women.
Hey, what's up with this food? Can't you make something tastier?
What do you mean? Is this really that bad?
It's alright, but it's just too basic. Why not make it more fancy like the ones in nice restaurants?
I'm not a professional chef, you know. I can't do that. And you've been living with me and eating my food all this time. How can you suddenly say this?
Living together and marriage are different. I thought if we got married, your cooking skills would get better. Ugh, what a disappointment.
This is the limit of my cooking skills. Don't expect magic for my dishes.
Isn't it normal to expect changes after getting married, though?
As if. I'm not a wizard or anything, okay? He expected us to have the same lifestyle as if we were always eating out at posh places or staying in nice hotels. Even though we had been living together for about 3 months and he should have understood my standard of living, he seemed to think that marriage would magically improve the quality. I thought, could a man who's been single until 42 have such fantasies? Isn't that too much of a dream for women? Keep in mind how great things still were before when you judge my housework abilities. I can't always reach that same level of perfection.
Ugh, you're so useless. Try harder to improve the quality.
He had never behaved like this before marriage. Being older and having never been in a relationship had been a complex for him. He was modest, almost fearful of women, and treated me kindly. Yet, after getting married, he flipped like a switch, began saying harsh things, and looked down on me as if I were far from his ideals. I never thought he was this kind of person. But still, I remember the Tony I dated, believing that with time, he would return to his old self. However, that was naive thinking on my part.
Can't something be done about this slightly off-tasting food? Come on, make something better. Isn't it normal for a housewife to be able to cook like we're eating out at a restaurant?
That was all my husband kept saying over and over again. When he was single, he couldn't cook, so he often visited various restaurants to enjoy good food. Because of that, his taste had become refined, and he started criticizing my cooking as terrible and poor. I thought, he used to say my cooking was tasty when we were living together. Who does he think he is? His complaints continued for about 3 months. Initially, he did not call the food bad, but lately he had begun to do so openly, which made his words even more infuriating. Why don't you just make your own food if you're going to complain so much? You've been to plenty of delicious places, surely you can make something tasty.
How could I possibly cook? I'm not a housewife. Think about what you're saying.
No matter what I said, my husband would just argue back and make excuses. When he found a spot that wasn't perfectly cleaned, he would scrutinize it like an annoying mother-in-law, constantly criticizing me. He'd say things like,
"Clean properly, it's dirty here."
Or,
"I never thought you were incapable of handling housework that much."
He'd often shout at me, insisting he wouldn't do anything and just got stressed for nothing.
I'm getting frustrated with how bad you are at doing housework. Can't you do something about it? Try to do it properly.
I am doing the housework properly. I told you before, this is my limit. Can't you understand how hard it is to manage housework while working?
Wow, Funny to hear that from you, someone who works at City Hall. You're doing overtime because you're incompetent, right? If you were competent, you could go home on time, right? Don't make excuses for your lack of skills. Try to improve. That's why I keep telling you every day.
You didn't understand anything. I had indeed told my husband that I was a City Hall employee, but I had not yet mentioned that I hold a managerial position. Maybe I should have mentioned that at the beginning, but now I was so appalled by his attitude that I didn't even want to say it anymore. But I had reached my limit of patience. I was determined to speak up and make him understand when he finally crossed a line that he should never have, touching my last nerve. It was a Sunday around noon, and as usual, I was heading to the supermarket to buy groceries for the week. As I drove to the store and realized I had not put my wallet in my bag when I parked, the bag opened and rolled out of the passenger seat. After searching for a few minutes under the assumption that it had fallen underneath the seat, I couldn't find it anywhere in the car. Oh no, I forgot my wallet at home to go shopping. Am I tired lately? I usually shopped at a discount supermarket about an hour away from my apartment, where food items were sold cheaply. After that, I decided to head back to the apartment to get my wallet, knowing it would be evening by the time I got there. Upon arriving and opening the front door, I heard suspicious noises coming from the living room. Huh? Is that Tony's voice? And who's he with? As I was about to take off my shoes, I noticed a pair of women's shoes smaller than mine. Pumps? Are these women's shoes? I knew for sure right then. Women's shoes at the door and weird noises from the living room. It has to be my husband and some other person doing something sketchy. It all clicked. He's cheating on me? He's never been in a relationship before he met me and now he's cheating? I thought of an affair, but considering my husband's past, it seemed unlikely. However, given his recent attitude towards me, it wouldn't be surprising if he really was having an affair. I quietly headed towards the living room, trying not to make a sound. The embarrassing noise I had heard from the entrance grew louder and reached my ears. Now, this woman is too loud. She shouldn't be enjoying herself in someone else's house. To get to the heart of the matter, I slightly opened the living room door to peek inside. There, I caught my husband and his mistress, Jane, in the act. What are you doing, you jerk? My anger reached its peak. He had constantly complained about my housekeeping, built up stress on his own, and now he was cheating. Seeing my husband's actions, I was disgusted and began filming the scene through a crack in the door, live streaming it to all our relatives. Then a message from my father-in-law popped up on my WhatsApp.
Punish that fool at a good time for you, Angela. Keep streaming as you barge into the living room. I'm on my way.
At the same time, my father also contacted me expressing his anger.
I'm coming too. There's no choice but to lecture Tony.
And that's when our counterattack began. I took my moment and burst into the living room. The two jumped up from the sofa, covering themselves with their hands and starting to complain.
Hey, what are you doing?
Live streaming to all the relatives. At that, the two were shocked and lunged at me.
Stop joking. What are you thinking? Stop it.
That's awful. Don't film people naked. Stop it now. What are you talking about? You have some nerve saying that while having an affair. As we were arguing, the front door suddenly slammed open and a bunch of people barged in. I thought, huh? It's just supposed to be my father-in-law and my father, right? Seems like there are a bunch of people. Just as I turned my gaze towards the living room door, my father and father-in-law burst in energetically.
Huh? Dad?
At that moment, following my father-in-law, two police officers in uniform entered, and seeing them, my husband panicked.
Why? Why are there police here? Stop, don't come near me.
He freaked out and clung to Jane, trembling. However, Jane suddenly pushed him away and yelled, What are you thinking? Clinging to me in this situation? Ugh, this is the worst.
Huh? Ugh.
It seemed my husband had instinctively clung to Jane upon seeing the police. I was completely taken aback. Both my father and father-in-law looked indescribable. What are you doing, you?
Please stop. I have a trauma with police officers. Don't come closer. Please stop.
My husband then retreated to a corner of the room and cowered there. Confused by what was happening, I asked my father-in-law why my husband was afraid of police officers.
He was quite a troublemaker in high school, well known as a delinquent in our neighborhood. Back then, a particularly scary police officer in the school area got on his case. Once he found out Tony was my son, he gave him a severe scolding, and since then, he's been terrified of police officers.
So you brought those two officers?
Yes, I asked some off-duty friends to come over in uniform today.
But why?
Tony always rebels when I say anything, so unless I have leverage, he won't confess or calm down. This was the only way.
My father-in-law then dragged my husband from the corner to the middle of the living room and made him kneel.
What were you thinking? Always causing trouble, and you haven't changed even as an adult, huh? I'm sorry, really sorry. I apologize for the affair, please. Just send the police away. No, they'll stay until you confess everything.
My husband's eyes were filled with fear. Glancing at the police officers nearby, he looked desperately for a way out. Don't run away. I'll have you explain everything to my father-in-law and everyone else, including how long you've been with Jane.
Why? Why do you have to blame me so much? There's no need to call the family.
Because you've done something blameworthy. Have you no sense of what you're doing? Each time someone raised their voice, the police officers moved a step closer. Every time they moved, my husband flinched and cowered even more. Watching his movements, I felt they were becoming ridiculous, and I kicked Tony and Jane's clothes towards them. Put some clothes on, will you? It's uncomfortable seeing you like this, it's creepy. I said this in a cold voice to the two of them. Once they hurriedly put on their clothes, my father and father-in-law made them sit on the floor between them, ensuring they couldn't move.
So, Tony, tell us what Angela was talking about when she said you've done things to her. Explain clearly, please. Well...
Overwhelmed by my father's imposing demeanor and knowing he held a position at the city hall, my husband couldn't find his voice and he just clammed up. Can't speak? Then shall I spell it all out for you? He nodded slightly, entrusting me to reveal everything. Alright, I'll say it then. Tony has always had unrealistic expectations for a spouse. He's been constantly dissatisfied with my housekeeping and complained every day. It's gotten worse over time, and eventually he grew disgusted with my shortcomings, claiming he was stressed out. I couldn't take it anymore.
Is that so? And Tony, did you know that Angela is a division chief at the city hall when you said all those things? What? Division chief?
Shocked by this unexpected revelation from my father, my husband looked at me in surprise.
I didn't know that. I knew you worked at the city hall, but you have a position?
I'm sorry, I should have told you right from the start, but you just assumed I was a regular staff member, so it was hard to bring it up.
So that's why you were always working late.
Yes, I'm busy because I have a position. Remember you moved into my place when we were dating and just stayed without asking. You do remember that I pay all the rent and utilities, right? You've never contributed to the living expenses. You know what that means, right? Wait a minute, he told me this was his house. What are you talking about? He said he was divorced and led me on, and now I'm exposed and embarrassed. I want compensation for this.
Quiet, outsider. We'll get to your part later, so don't interrupt now. Just wait.
At that moment, my father's aura intimidated everyone around. Tony, Jane, and even the police officers who came with my father-in-law were taken aback by the force in his voice, and a sudden silence fell.
This was bound to happen, Tony. The crime of driving my beloved daughter to mental distress is severe. You see the anger in Angela's father's face, right? Resign yourself to it.
Then my husband knelt down on the spot and apologized to me.
I'm truly sorry. I take back everything I've said to Angela. I also apologize for the affair. Please, don't divorce me. Don't leave me.
Now you say this? I trusted you, but an affair is a deal breaker. It's over. Let's get divorced.
Please, if you divorce me now, I'll be lost.
Hearing these significant words from my husband, I questioned him further. Are you implying you've lost your job?
How did you know?
I could tell by the way you said it. Plus, you've been coming home early lately, so that's what it was.
Yes, that's the situation. So please don't abandon me.
No, after all the scorn and the affair, and now you ask me not to abandon you? Ugh, that's too selfish. Just then, Jane slapped my husband. You're the worst. You lured me in saying I know lots of fancy places because I have money and lied about being recently divorced. And now you're begging your real wife not to leave you? What do you think of me then? You've gone too far. Pay me back for our dates. My husband's words left Jane in shock, and she continued to berate him while crying and shaking him. You were just deceived by my husband. Poor thing.
I wasn't deceiving anyone. I really like her too.
At that moment, another slap from Jane landed on my husband's cheek. Don't mock me. What do you mean I like her? Who's more important to you, me or her? My husband was rendered speechless by Jane's words and just let himself be shaken, unable to respond.
I never thought it would come to such a chaotic scene. I only intended to date her briefly. It was just a fling. I thought my luck was turning when I got married to Angela. That's why I spent all my salary on her. Being with Angela was stressful, so being with someone new was exciting.
Enough with the disrespect. She's practically a victim too. You tricked her into coming here, making her feel like a criminal. Your actions are too selfish. Freed from Jane's grasp, my husband once again knelt before us and apologized.
I understand. I won't ask for forgiveness, but please let me apologize. I'll take all the blame for this. Please overlook her involvement. I really am sorry. If we divorce, I'll leave this house. Is that okay? You think that's enough to be forgiven? You've insulted my daughter. I can't just let that slide. You'll have to pay a decent settlement. Please wait. I'm unemployed right now. Can you please spare me from the settlement? No. You must atone for what you've done.
Then my husband started crying and begging in front of my father.
Please, I'm begging you. What should I do now without a job? Tony, how did it come to this? I knew you were careless, but to be discarded by your company too? I've always struggled at work, bullied and told, you're an idiot. Why can't you learn even one task after 2 years? But think about it. No one ever really taught me anything. Whenever I asked, they'd say, watch and learn. But they never really taught me anything. I tried my hardest, but couldn't do anything. So a month ago, they laughed and said, you're fired. I see. Did you choose the wrong company, or were you just not adaptable? I'm not sure. But maybe I also bear some responsibility since I disciplined you when you were young. Dad, is it really your fault? Tony is already 42 years old, a fully grown adult. It's not right for you to feel responsible. Isn't it Tony who should be taking full responsibility? Are you trying to appeal to everyone's sympathy like some tragic heroine? Shouldn't you be facing the consequences of your actions more seriously? I'm sorry. All I can do now is apologize. I don't know what to do. I can't sympathize with you, Tony. The way you treated my daughter, the affair, and even losing your job, it all seems like you brought it upon yourself. A 42-year-old adult who can't handle his job and gets bullied? Shouldn't you be more responsible? Aren't you still not independent? Saying don't leave me to Angela already shows that. This is a good opportunity to grow up and face real challenges.
Right. You used to brag about living day by day when we were dating, but you were just living without any plan, weren't you? Weren't you actually kicked out of your previous apartment before you moved in with me? As I said this, my husband tensed up as if struck by the truth and looked at me.
Sorry, you're right. I was living carelessly without any plans. I just wanted to eat delicious food, and that's all I spent my money on.
You're such a fool. After being forced to speak about everything he has said to me, the affair, and exposing his own failures, my husband was left speechless. He broke down crying on the spot. Jane, my father, and I all watched him with cold eyes. The only one who showed any sympathy, my father-in-law, approached Tony and said,
Why don't you try to reform now? I'll help you.
But Tony shook him off and refused.
I've lived a terrible life so far. Living without plans and getting married by chance made me arrogant. It was all wrong. I won't ask for help anymore. I'll take care of it myself, Dad. I'm sorry for causing trouble. I'll manage on my own from now on, and I will pay the compensation. I'm an adult, so I should take full responsibility.
Tony said this with a serious look in his eyes toward his father. His gaze was earnest. Whether he could truly change, I didn't know, but at that moment I felt his resolve. So, without further accusations, I let him leave the house and told him to come back later to sign the divorce papers, leaving with my father-in-law.
Do you think Tony can change?
I don't know, but his eyes were as pure as when I first met him. If he can maintain that feeling, maybe he can do it.
Are you going to support him?
No, I can't. I don't have any feelings for him now. Jane, left behind, was listening to our conversations intently. What should I do? I don't know. Stop pretending like you're the one who got hurt when you were the one who cheated. You need to make things right. I'm sorry. It was wrong of me to be deceived by such a fool. I will pay the compensation. Jane diligently shared her contact information with me and quickly left the uncomfortable situation. It's like everyone here is a whirlwind of craziness. I'm just so tired. I said this and finally allowed myself to cry on my father's shoulder. Later, my husband came to the house brought by his father. His head was shaved, appearing to show an outdated form of repentance. Did you shave your head as a sign of repentance?
No, it's more like I'm psyching myself up. I've decided to stop living a sloppy life.
I see. His eyes were different from before. They showed a resolve to accomplish something.
I'm really sorry for what happened. I told him I'd pay the compensation, but Tony is stubborn once he's made up his mind. He told me absolutely not. I will pay, so don't interfere. I want to believe in Tony, but after what happened, if there's any trouble, please call me, Angela.
I heard this from my father-in-law. I want to believe in Tony too, but it's hard to trust him completely after being betrayed once. However, this time I decided to trust his serious eyes and leave him to his own devices. That said, I could only do so because my father-in-law said he would support me. Since then, Jane has paid the compensation properly, and Tony, although in small amounts, has been consistently paying compensation. Occasionally, I receive calls from my father-in-law.
Tony is clumsy when it comes to relationship and being coordinated, unable to do anything smoothly. Even now it seems he's still being teased at work, but he's trying his best and hasn't come back home, living alone and insisting on doing it alone.
Despite his clumsiness, my ex-husband is desperately earning money and managing to live. So far, he has been able to pay the compensation, but I feel like it might revert to how it was before at some point. It's really about how long he can keep up his willpower. I want to believe in him, but it's hard to fully trust him, probably because he's betrayed people before. I realized just how important trust is in relationships because of my husband's actions. Once trust is lost, it takes a long time to regain it. This is exactly what that means. As for me, I continue to live in the apartment, still single. Will I find love again? I think about it, but honestly, I don't feel like dating for a while. The incident has made me even more wary of love. Should I introduce you to a nice guy? When I visit my family home, my sister occasionally says this. I am indeed in my 40s, so she has a reason to worry. Not now. I think I'll find someone eventually. I brushed off her suggestion. But truthfully, I am a little interested in someone. There's this older man who shows up at City Hall every now and then for paperwork. Whenever he sees me, he smiles and waves. I'm being a bit careful because of what happened in the past. I'm not officially dating him, but I might think about it once I get to know him more.
I witnessed my husband's affair. I believe such experiences are rare. Most people confront their husbands after finding evidence of infidelity on their smartphones, but I happened to see it with my own eyes. Never did I imagine that it would be in such a place, witnessed by so many people. Sure, I had felt suspicious about the relationship for a while, but I never expected to see my husband doing that in such a place. I'm Sophia, a full-time homemaker with a 6-year-old son. On the day I witnessed the affair, my husband was off work, and we planned to go out as a family, but when I woke up, my husband was already gone. There was a message on my smartphone from my husband saying, "My sister has a high fever of 39 degrees, so I'm going to take care of her. It seems that no one is at home today. I'll be back in the evening." I let out a big sigh. I had told our son that we were going to the amusement park today, and he had been looking forward to it since the day before. I was told that my husband was recently put in charge of a major project, and he hadn't been able to take a break for the past 6 months. So this break was a rare chance for some family time, but he ended up going to take care of his sick sister. His sister is supposed to be engaged, so it should be fine to leave it to him. Anyway, my husband is a sister complex. The reason why I started dating him was because he said, "You're wonderful because you're like my sister. which made me feel uneasy. Well, his sister was very beautiful and kind when I met her for the pre-wedding greeting, and I guess that resembling her is the highest compliment from my husband. But I couldn't help but feel creeped out. My husband used to say, "I want a boy and a girl," and frequently asked for sex, but since our son was born, the frequency has significantly decreased. Now it's almost non-existent. We're still young, and my husband used to enjoy sex, so I can't help but suspect that he's doing with other women or that he's cheating. Well, if he just betrayed me, I could still forgive him. It's infuriating though, but the problem is that he disappears from morning every day on his days off, like today. On his days off, he could at least play with the kid once in a while, couldn't he? Our child is such a daddy's boy that he cries when he realizes his father is not around. My husband is too indifferent towards our child. He doesn't even prepare a birthday present, and he doesn't participate in school events, no matter how free he is. Even when he comes home early occasionally, he just holes up in his room and plays video games all the time. He hardly ever faces our son. Our son, who used to be a daddy's boy, will probably start to see his father as a stranger if this continues. Oh, and the part about my husband being busy because he was put in charge of a major project was a lie. I mean, he hardly ever comes home, so I once asked a former classmate who works at the same company as my husband, "Is my husband really that busy?" My classmate laughed and told me, "No way, your husband is actually a Windows side employee, and he always looks free because he has no work. He leaves works on time every day." I thought, I knew it. After all, despite supposedly being put in charge of a major project, his salary is only in the 200,000 yen range, and he never looked tired from working overtime. In fact, he looked rather glossy. This is also a factor that makes me suspect his infidelity. Despite harboring a lot of dissatisfaction, I finished preparing breakfast. I check the time and tilt my head. This is strange. Usually he wakes up by 7 o'clock even if I don't wake him, but it's already past that time. At this rate, he will miss the bus to the nursery school, so I hurriedly went to wake up my son. In the room, my son was still sleeping, and when I tried to wake him up saying, "It's morning, wake up!" instead of a response, I heard a groan of pain. As I worried, I reached out to my son's painful face and put my hand on his forehead. It was very hot. I called my son's name and lightly shook his shoulder. Barely opening his eyes, my son said, "Mom, it hurts." I was almost panicked for a moment. Around this time, there was an outbreak of that illness at the daycare center, and I wondered if my son had caught it too. I had heard that there were cases where people died from it, so I seriously thought my son might not make it. In desperation, I called my husband, but he didn't answer at all. With no time to wait for a reply to an email, I decided to call my mother and ask for first aid advice. My mother is a nurse, so I thought it would be best to ask an expert. Under my mother's precise instructions, I quickly prepared a cold compress and measured my son's temperature. It was over 39 degrees Celsius. I called an ambulance and made sure my son to drink a lot of fluids while waiting for it to arrive. According to my mother, there was also a possibility of heat stroke. Considering the risk of infection, I wasn't allowed to accompany him in the ambulance, so I called a taxi and headed to the hospital where he would be taken. In the meantime, I kept calling my husband, even though I knew it was futile. As expected, it was pointless. With no other choice, I left a message online. I figured he would come as soon as he noticed, assuming he was still responsible enough to do so while out in his car. I arrived at the hospital and prayed as I waited in the corridor outside the emergency room for my son's treatment to finish. My father had once been taken into the emergency room just like this, and he never came out. Just as I was imagining the worst, thinking, what if my son doesn't come out either? My mother, who had rushed to the hospital, comforted me. "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay." And then, an hour later, my son miraculously survived. But he was told that he should be hospitalized for at least a week, so he was taken straight to a ward. In the end, my husband didn't come home that day. The next day, I went home to get my son's change of clothes, and I decided to visit him in the hospital with some fruit for him to eat. I also planned to say hello to the doctor who had taken care of us the day before, so I passed by the emergency room. Suddenly, the area became hectic. I thought, maybe someone was brought in, so I decided to postpone saying hello to the doctor so as not to be in the way. Just as I thought I was about to go to my son's ward, I saw a man and a woman being carried on a stretcher. They were barely covered with a thin blanket, almost as if they were naked. It seems like they were still joined together. It must be one of those situations where the man's thing can't come out during the act. I've never experienced it, but it must be quite troublesome. But being carried in this state must be embarrassing. As I was thinking this and about to pass by, I made eye contact with the man. Under normal circumstances, it would be an awkward situation, but for me, it was different. I was stunned, because the man was my husband. Why are you here like this? I exclaimed in surprise.
No, well, I caught my sister's cold, so,
My husband was at loss for words. At that moment, I was also confused. My son had just been taken here yesterday, and now my husband too? What are the odds of that happening? And why was my husband being carried in naked? And who is the woman with him? All sorts of thoughts were whirling around in my head. In the midst of all this, I accidentally make eye contact with the woman who is intertwined with my husband. Even in my state of confusion, I can tell this woman is my husband's mistress. As I glared at her, I realized that her face was very familiar. Why is Sophia here? Hearing her voice, I finally remembered. Yes, that woman was Amelia, my husband's sister. I felt this moment is incredibly long. I suspected my husband was lying about taking care of his sister and meeting a woman instead, but I never expected this. Even if he was coming to visit our son, he should not have come while still joined with the woman. But the woman is his real sister? There are limits to how much one can mess around, because they were taken away on a stretcher. All I could do was hold back my urge to lunge at them and wait. They couldn't escape anyway, so I decided to confront them later. With that thought in mind, I headed to visit my son, still feeling sick deep down. I spent some time in my son's room trying to sort out my feelings. When I casually checked my phone, I saw a ton of messages from my husband online. Looking at the content, it was all just him trying to cover up his actions. He didn't even mention our son's hospitalization. I decided to keep ignoring him and waited another hour. Then the doctor who had been in charge of my son the day before appeared. The doctor smiled at me and said,
"Your son is doing very well. He might be able to be discharged earlier than expected. His fever had come down and his condition seemed to have completely stabilized."
Initially, I was worried about an infectious disease, but it seems he had heat stroke in addition to the cold.
"You made sure he drank a lot of water, didn't you? That was the right move. You're a smart mother and your son must be happy."
He even praised me that much. If anything, it's thanks to my mother. Maybe I'll give her some high-quality meat next time. I deeply bowed to the kind doctor and expressed my gratitude, but it wasn't hard to imagine that I was about to face quite a storm. I had just been relieved about my son's condition, but I was beginning to boil inside. Mommy's face is scary. I had frightened my son. I quickly put on a smile and told my son, "I'll be right back," before stepping outside the hospital and calling my husband, who had left more than 100 unanswered calls. The moment my husband answered the phone, he started,
"It's not what you think. There's a reason."
And he started making excuses. He's got the order wrong. Shouldn't he first be worried about our son? Well, there's no way a man who was so engrossed in his act with his own sister, completely disregarding our son, would worry about him. With a husband like this, I was worried about my son's future. As I didn't think my husband's personality could improve, I decided to divorce him. I think life will be tough, but for my son's sake, I can endure it, right? I told him, "You were busy with that, even when our son was suffering, right? You've always been doing that whenever you had the time, haven't you? And with your own sister. It's really disgusting." My husband was at loss for words. I continued, "Oh, and by the way, I've already reported this to your parents. I won't tell your company. It would be a problem if you can't pay alimony and child support. So goodbye," I said to my husband, expressing my finality. 3 days later. My son's health recovered faster than expected, so after completing the discharge procedures, we returned home together for the first time in a long time. Of course, my husband wasn't there. After the commotion, my husband showed up to apologize directly, but I showed the divorce papers already signed in his face. My husband begged,
"It was my first time. Forgive me for one mistake. You're all I have."
But I coldly told him, "So you're still lying at this point. I already know everything. Your sister confessed everything." Yes, I anticipated that my husband wouldn't easily agree to a divorce, so to silence him, I first approached his sister, the person involved. "Sister-in-law, I heard you're going to have a wedding ceremony with your boyfriend soon. Congrats." Thank you." I was thinking of sending a congratulatory message, and a good idea came to mind. Want to know what it is? No way. You're not planning to talk about this, are you? Yes, because I want everyone to know. They'll understand what kind of person you are at once if I tell them this. I smiled slyly. Please, anything, okay, but not that. If you do that, my life will be over. I pretended to think for a moment and then continued with a smile. Can't be helped. Then let's do this. I'll keep quiet about this matter if you tell me in detail how many times you did it with my husband. Then I promise to keep quiet. Of course, your younger brother will feel betrayed, but what will you do? Then, without hesitation, my sister-in-law confessed everything, begging, I'll tell you everything, just please don't tell him. When I told my husband this, he fainted from the shock of being betrayed by the sister he loved more than anyone else. After waking up, my husband signed the divorce papers and left the house dejectedly. From then on, through my lawyer, I demanded a divorce custody of our son, alimony, and child support from him. He haggled over the amount, but when I whispered in his ear, Would you like me to spill the beans to your company? He said,
Alright, I will pay the amount you said.
And left the lawyer's office. Later, for some reason, the company found out about what happened and my husband was summoned and severely reprimanded. A month later, he was fired from the company and now he works at a food factory putting strawberries on cakes to pay the alimony and child support. Somehow the factory also knows about what he did and he seems to be constantly gossiped about by young girls, making him uncomfortable. As for my husband's sister, despite the fact that I didn't expose her, everything came out and she was dumped by her fiancé. It seems that the boyfriend, like me, suspected infidelity and had hired a private investigator to conduct a surveillance. She was demanded a large sum of money as compensation for breaking off the engagement, and now she seems to be working at a nightclub. Also, the other day, I was given a photo of them in the act by her ex-boyfriend saying,
Use it if something happens.
I wondered what kind of nerve he had to give such a thing to a woman like me, but I decided to keep it in my dresser. I'll gratefully use it as a precaution in case I get a message from my ex-husband or something happens. I moved back to my parents' home to start fresh, and I'm working hard to raise my son with their help. Since my parents lived far away, they had been longing to see their grandson and told me they would help as much as they could. I don't want to overburden them, so I guess I'll only ask for their help when I need it. By the way, my son, as if his high fever at the time was a lie, has been healthy ever since, and now, 3 years later, he is always recognized for perfect attendance. He seems to have completely forgotten about his real father and is enjoying his life every day. This is what makes me happiest. Oh, by the way, I have a new family member. It's a white cat named Snow who is comfortably sleeping on my lap. It was when I said my final goodbye to Snow, who often came to play in my yard before I moved. Just as usual, it climbed onto my lap and then became as still as a stone Buddha. I was also lonely to leave Snow behind, so I decided to bring it home with me. Now, Snow is a good friend to my parents and my family home, and it has become just as important to me as my son. From now on, I want to warmly watch my son's growth along with my parents and Snow. I thought about this while stroking Snow on the porch.
A fiancé, the person you promised to marry. I once had a fiancé, but I wasn't going to live with him because of my sister. I was in the depths of despair at that time, but now I found new happiness. I want to make that clear to my sister and my ex-fiancé. My name is Emma. I'm not particularly beautiful, and I'm just a normal office worker. Back then, I had someone I promised to marry. His name was Mike. Mike was a handsome man who worked at a well-known company, and he was known as the good-looking guy. We were so happy back then, I thought that this happiness would last forever. But reality confronted me with a cruel result. I couldn't get married to Mike, and the reason was because of my sister. My sister's name is Evelyn. Evelyn has been interested in fashion since she was young. Even now, she still loves fashion. In fact, Evelyn was always concerned about her appearance and was always beautiful. Therefore, Evelyn has been popular amongst the guys since junior high school. She even modeled for a fashion magazine once. That experience made Evelyn dream of becoming a model. When I graduated from university and started working for an ordinary company, I was invited to dinner by a business partner. That partner was Mike. After exchanging contact with Mike several times and occasionally going out to eat, something happened one day. That day, after work, Mike invited me to dinner. Of course, I had no reason to refuse, so I went out to eat. On the way home that day, Mike confessed his feelings for me. I was surprised by his sudden confession, but I was also attracted to Mike, so we started dating. So 1 year after I started dating Mike, he proposed to me. I was so happy at the time. Of course, I accepted the proposal. Later, Mike and I went to my parents' house to report and greet them. My parents were, of course, overjoyed. We talked about the wedding and I was happy. But there was someone who wasn't happy. That was my sister, Evelyn. Evelyn was very surprised to see that I was getting married and who my partner was. Evelyn, who was more beautiful than me and often had men asking her out, always looked down on me because I didn't have much experience in relationships. I don't want my friends to know about how uncool my sister is. That was Evelyn's catchphrase. The uncool sister, whom she looked down on, was getting married before her, and to an elite businessman from a major company. That seemed to hurt Evelyn's pride even more, but I was completely unaware of Evelyn's feelings. I should have noticed Evelyn's attitude at the time. Suddenly, Evelyn asked Mike, "If you're going to be my brother-in-law, can we exchange contact information?" Mike and I had no reason to refuse, so we happily agreed. There were days when I was working late on handover tasks as I was planning to quit my job. And one day, when my parents were out of town on a trip, Evelyn took a certain action. In hindsight, it must have been a plan she had thought of from the beginning. Once I quit my job, I would move out of my parents' house and start living with Mike. So she probably wanted to execute her plan while I was still at home. First, Evelyn called Mike over to her house. "Mike, my sister suddenly came home because she got sick. My parents are out on a trip, and I'm scared to be alone. Can you come over?" Evelyn lied that I had come home early from work due to a sudden illness. Mike was just about to go home from work, so he hurried over to her house without suspecting about anything.
I heard Emma was suddenly sick, so I rushed over. Where's Emma?
Of course, I wasn't there. It's only natural for Mike to think that. But Evelyn said, "I'm sorry, Mike. I lied to you. My sister isn't actually sick. She's still at work." Upon hearing this, Mike didn't get angry at Evelyn but asked,
Why did you lie like that?
I just really needed to talk to you, Mike. And so, Evelyn started to talk. When I finished work and got home, I was surprised. It was because Mike was there. But I didn't expect anything and was carefree, saying, "Oh, you're here." Then later, I was to experience the greatest despair and sadness I had ever felt in my life.
Emma, I'm sorry. I want us to break up.
It was too sudden. I couldn't quite grasp the meaning of his words. Eh? You're kidding, right? Break up? What do you mean? As I was questioning Mike, Evelyn appeared.
Emma, the truth is, I'm dating Evelyn. I'm sorry, Emma. I fell in love with Evelyn more than you.
While I was still confused and couldn't believe it, Evelyn said this. "I'm sorry, but Mike and I are going to get married." I didn't understand what was happening. And then Evelyn continued. "You might not want to come to our wedding, but at least come to the reception." After that, all I could do was cry. My fiancé was taken by Evelyn, and I was not wanted anymore. Both my father and mother were very worried. For a while, I couldn't leave my room. Since I had already resigned from my job, I had nothing to do. I received several messages from my colleagues at work asking when the wedding would be. I told them that we had decided to have a simple wedding with only our families. A few months later, I was in an unfamiliar place. I'm going to start my life with a new beginning from here. I want to be happy again. This time, for sure. After breaking up with Mike, I had been shut in for a while, but a certain emotion was born in me. Why do I have to go through this? I'll forget about that man and start over again. From there, things moved quickly. I talked to my father and mother and decided to leave home and live on my own, living in a completely unknown place. but it's a very comfortable place with lots of green and tranquility. My parents didn't try to stop me, and they helped me a lot when I moved. After moving in and taking a break from the move, I heard this story from my mother. A few days after you shut yourself in your room, Mike came. I heard everything that happened between you and Mike. And then she apologized in the end. I didn't understand why my parents were apologizing.
Of course, what Mike did is unforgivable. His parents came to apologize too. They even got on their knees to apologize. But you see, we also heard about Evelyn. We know you can't forgive her, but Evelyn is our precious daughter too.
My parents told me. Both my father and mother have been troubled about what happened. Mike did something terrible to their own daughter. It's only natural that they could not forgive such a person like him. But despite what my parents said to her, it seems that Evelyn had gone to Mike. Since then, Mike had been coming to the house at the same time every day apologizing and asking them to accept his marriage to Evelyn. My parents had no choice but to accept Mike's actions. So that's why they apologized to me for acknowledging their marriage. Honestly, I didn't care anymore, but I understood my parents' feelings all too well. It's over now, it's okay. Besides, I'm going to meet someone even more wonderful from now on. I answered positively, holding back the tears that were about to fall. My mother was crying. My father had a remorseful look on his face, but he responded with a smile when I said, "When I have a child, I'll rely on you both a lot. If anything happens, don't overdo it and contact us right away." My mother was very worried. Once I got used to my new life and had some peace of mind, I started working at a certain restaurant. It was a small restaurant with only a few employees, but it was very bright, and I really liked the friendly atmosphere everyone had. The manager's name was Noah, and he was always being teased by the part-timers. How they teased Noah was interesting, and it was very peaceful to watch. A few months after I started working, a fateful event that would affect my future occurred. Noah confessed his feelings to me. It was after the shop had closed, and he was giving me a ride home. I was honestly torn. Noah is a very good person, and above all, he is kind. His personality and looks are both so good that he is popular among women. But I was still haunted by that incident. I was scared I might be abandoned again. Perhaps Noah sensed my situation because he said that he didn't need an immediate answer and left that day. Things were a bit awkward for a while, but thanks to the usual interactions with the part-timers and the kind Noah, I didn't worry too much. Perhaps my heart had already made up its mind. At that time, I learned something about Noah during a break. It turns out that Noah had been betrayed by someone he was dating and had a terrible experience at the place he worked before this shop. Noah was the same as me. He had a past of being betrayed by someone he loved. That day, I decided to go home with Noah to hear his story. While we were walking home together, Noah told me his story. In fact, Noah had been in charge of a store before he came here. However, due to a certain incident, the store lost its credibility and had to close. And Noah was held responsible and got fired. After hearing his story, I decided to tell Noah why I came to this place. After the talk, Noah said,
"You did well."
Despite the difficulties, I stood up and looked forward again, and he said such gentle words to me. I was happy, and I realized that this was what I really wanted to hear, that I did well. I was betrayed by the person I loved and had a difficult time, but I got over it. Honestly, it was very hard. And I told Noah, "You did well too." And to this, Noah was smiling. And then I responded to his confession that day. "I'm like this, but I hope we can get along well." After that, I was teased more than ever by the part-timers at the shop, but I was really happy. "Congratulations! Wishing you both on your happiness for a long time."
It's too early for that line.
If you say it's too early, that means there will be a time, right? Then I'll say it again at that time.
Make sure you let me say it, okay? Otherwise, I won't forgive you. Well...
Noah seemed a bit flustered. I was laughing. Everyone was laughing. I was really happy. Then one day, after so many days had passed, I received a proposal for the second time in my life. Of course, I accepted the proposal. I had the determination to be happy this time and believed that I could definitely be happy with Noah. And then I went to see my parents for the first time in a while. They were very happy. When I told them that I had told Noah everything, my parents said,
"Please make our daughter happy." "I will definitely make Emma happy,"
he answered clearly and confidently. We talked for a while, but then my father hesitantly said,
"It seems that Evelyn and Mike are going to have a wedding ceremony."
They might send an invitation, but my parents told me I didn't have to push myself. But I didn't care anymore, because I'm happy now. In fact, I wanted to show off my current happiness. When I told my parents that, they said,
"If you say so, Emma. Noah, we're counting on you if anything happens."
A few days later, I received a wedding invitation from Evelyn. Of course, I decided to attend. I wrote that we would be coming together. Noah and I, knowing that Evelyn was going to have a wedding ceremony, had already registered our marriage. Because we thought that it would be a burden on our parents and relatives if we had wedding ceremonies after wedding ceremonies. We swore to have a wedding ceremony when things calmed down. On the day of Evelyn's wedding, Noah and I were heading to the venue together. It was a long-awaited reunion with Evelyn and Mike, but somehow, Mike looked a little worn out. And at the family introduction, I introduced Noah to him, saying, "This is my husband Noah. He is my pride and joy." When I introduced Noah for some reason, Evelyn looked really surprised, which was quite memorable. On the other hand, I had something I really wanted to ask Mike. I wanted to ask about what had happened with him and Evelyn on that day when my parents and I were not there. At first, Mike seemed to have a hard time talking about it, but gradually he began to speak about it. On the day he was called by Evelyn, Mike, who found out that I was seriously ill, seemed to have decided to wait for me. Then, Evelyn brought some alcohol, really strong ones, saying that it was a good opportunity and offered it to him. Mike, who is not very good at drinking, seems to have gotten drunk after drinking about 2 cups. And Evelyn, seeing this as a good opportunity, started to seduce him. Mike, too, was drunk and lost his ability to judge properly, and ended up going along with the temptation. Evelyn is attractive. She has a good figure, and I guess it's natural for a normal man to be tempted by such a woman. But Mike and I were engaged. Nevertheless, Mike was seduced and began to get conscious of Evelyn. After telling me this story, Mike apologized many times, but at that moment, he looked very small to me. Honestly, I didn't care anymore. I was satisfied just to hear the truth. Meanwhile, Noah and Evelyn were also talking about something. I was curious, but since it was almost time for Evelyn's wedding ceremony, I decided to ask later. Then, on the way home, I asked Noah again. "Didn't you seem a bit angry when you were talking to Evelyn?"
I told you before, but actually she's the one who cheated on me when we were dating. Not only that, but she is also the reason why I was fired from the shop where I used to work."
I was very surprised. It's a small world, isn't it? And I was even more surprised to learn that she was the reason why Noah's shop had to close. I decided to ask him for more details. Apparently, Evelyn had been having an affair with a certain designer a few months after she started dating Noah. It seems that Evelyn, although dating Noah, thought it would be more convenient for her future to date someone in the industry to become a model. Noah, who accidentally found out about this, naturally got angry with Evelyn. However, Evelyn got angry at Noah, and in return, they broke up. But Evelyn, who was still angry, created a fake photo of the food she had taken at Noah's restaurant, which had a foreign object in the food, and spread it around on social media. At that time, Evelyn was also an amateur model and had quite a number of followers on her social media, and the photo had quickly went viral. It also caught the eye of the boss, who had entrusted the shop to Noah, and because the sales started to decrease, the shop was closed. Then Noah was held responsible and was fired. Naturally, Noah felt bitter because of what had happened. However, since he didn't know who the perpetrator was, he had nowhere to direct his anger. In the midst of this, he found out the truth when a friend of his invited him for a drink. His friend's girlfriend knew someone who knew Evelyn, and from that friend, he was shown a conversation about how a certain restaurant disappeared due to what Evelyn spread on social media. Of course, his friend did not know that the restaurant that disappeared was Noah's restaurant. Noah, who found the culprit in an unexpected place, couldn't do anything about it anymore, so he decided to start over alone in a different place. That's where he met me. I apologized to Noah. "I'm sorry my sister did such a terrible thing." I'm the sister of the person who messed up Noah's life. I didn't know what to do. I seriously thought that Noah might hate me, but Noah said,
"It's a thing of the past, and it's not your fault, Emma."
I was honestly relieved, and we decided once again to be happy together. Later on, Evelyn finally got her punishment. The place Evelyn visited for a photo shoot when she decided to do a gravure shoot. That place was none other than the place where we live at the moment. Surely, with all the greenery here, one could take nice photos. Evelyn seemed to be thinking of becoming a model using this experience in gravure shoot as a stepping stone. The incident happened at a restaurant which she visited for a meal. The restaurant was, in fact, Noah's restaurant. I had already stopped working at Noah's restaurant, so I heard about this later on. As soon as they entered the restaurant, both Noah and Evelyn recognized each other. Immediately, Noah said,
"I'm sorry, I can't allow you to enter the restaurant,"
and refused their entry. Naturally, the photo shoot staff members were angry and asked for an explanation. Noah explained everything that Evelyn had done in the past and what he had gone through because of her.
"She has a criminal record, and there is solid evidence. I don't want to go through the same thing again, so I don't want her to enter my restaurant."
It seemed she couldn't say anything back to that, and Evelyn also turned pale. Furthermore, Noah said that he would tell the president of the company where Evelyn was about to join all about her past. The person who recruited Evelyn was surprised upon hearing the story, and he asked Evelyn to quit, but Noah couldn't control his anger. In the end, Evelyn lost the gravure shoot deal, and the news of her past incidents spread in the industry, crushing her dream of becoming a model. No one would want to deal with someone who had caused such a huge scandal in the past. Moreover, I heard from my mother that Mike's company performance had been deteriorating recently, and he was now a candidate for a demotion. It seems that even my mother was worried about what would happen to these two in the future. Despite such an incident, Noah and I continue to live happily every day. And today is our long-awaited wedding day. Both Noah and I have had difficult times in the past, but now we are very happy. Inside my belly, there was also a new life growing. Congratulations! I wish you both happiness for many years to come. Colleagues from the restaurant where we met were saying a line I've heard before, while they laughed to us. Thank you. And then Noah and I swore in front of everyone that we would always cherish our family and always be happy.
My name is Camilla, a 26-year-old housewife. I'm in my third year of marriage with no children. My husband's name is John. He's a company employee and 30 years old. My husband and I started dating after he approached me at the company where I was a receptionist, and we got married after 2 years of dating. Before marriage, there was no talk of living together with my in-laws, but as soon as the marriage was decided, my mother-in-law suggested that we will live together. I told my husband that I didn't want to live together while we were newlyweds, but he said, "You work at home, doing chores and errands. And I work at the company. That's rare. And he showed me his palm in front of my face, indicating that I shouldn't say anything more. I accepted living together and thought it might be inevitable as I was marrying the eldest son. Since the marriage was decided, we were supposed to go to the wedding venue together, but my mother-in-law always came with my husband. I felt uncomfortable with my mother-in-law, who even had a say in our wedding plan and my husband's outfit. I looked at my husband's face and wondered if I was marrying him or my mother-in-law, as he seemed to be excited about it. To be honest, my mood dropped at the thought of living with a mama's boy husband and mother-in-law. I'm the type of person who can't stand being in such a frustrated state, so I asked my husband when we were alone, "John, are you by any chance a mama's boy?" John asked back, "Why do you think so?" With a curious look, I told my husband, "Usually, the two of us should decide on the wedding plan. I've never heard of a mother coming along and having a say." My husband said, "I just came along because I had time before my mother's errand. And it's not interference, it's just advice, so don't worry about it. And I'm not a mama's boy," he replied. When he asked, "What would you do if I was a mama's boy?" I answered, "I wouldn't get married. It would only feel like being in enemy territory, wouldn't it? We'd better call off the wedding now for our future's sake." I answered honestly. My husband said, "I'm not a mama's boy, and if my mother does something to Camilla, I'll protect you," with a laugh. So I decided to believe him and get married. After that day, my mother-in-law stopped coming to the wedding venue. We finished our wedding ceremony, moved our belongings into our room at my in-laws' house, and departed for our honeymoon. Upon our return, I found our room had been tidied up and the luggage had been unpacked. I was surprised to find that furniture, including a bed, had already been set up, as I was planning to organize them later. Everything, down to the curtains, was in place, ready for immediate living. I couldn't find my belongings, so I asked my husband. He replied, "You'd have to ask my mom." So I went down to the first floor to ask my mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, thank you for tidying up the luggage, but I can't find my belongings." When I asked, she said, "Oh, your things? I threw away what we didn't need. There were valuables like my bank book and personal seal." "Oh, don't worry. I'm keeping those. I threw everything else away." I was taken back and said, "Those are my personal belongings. Please return them to me. My bank book and seal are my personal items from before I got married," I said with my hand gesture. My mother-in-law frowned and said, "Are you defying me as a daughter-in-law? Fine, I'll give you back your bank book and seal. Wait here." She stomped off to fetch them. When she returned, she tossed the bank book and seal onto the floor. I hurriedly checked inside and found that $1 million had been withdrawn. "Mother-in-law, did you withdraw $1 million?" I asked, to which she replied without any remorse, "Of course, I bought you furniture." I was speechless. I immediately returned to our room and angrily told my husband what had happened. My husband responded, "Oh, she bought us this furniture? Thanks," which infuriated me. Wait a minute, it's a crime to use my savings without permission. Moreover, she chose such bad tasting furniture and curtains. Who wouldn't be angry about this? Seeing how angry I was, my husband said, "I'll go talk to my mother," and went to her. I regretted my decision to live together, fearing what the future would bring. Looking around, I saw curtains filled with large roses on a pink background, a cheap-looking wardrobe reminiscent of my childhood. Everything I looked at made me sigh. The bed covers on the bed I lay down on, exhausted, had a cherry pattern. I wasn't sure if it was a form of harassment or a kind thought, but seeing them made me feel sad. As I was thinking this, my husband returned from his mother's room. "Mom's so angry, I couldn't talk to her. She said no other mother-in-law would do as much as she has. She did it out of kindness," she said. and doesn't deserve to be complained about. I, astounded, asked my husband, "Don't you feel sad looking at this furniture, these curtains, these bed covers?" He looked around, his face turning pale. "Maybe we can slowly change these things without my mom noticing," he said, trying to appease me. "What about the money? Will the money be returned?" I asked, as I did not work hard and save to spend money on such frivolous things. He apologized on behalf of his mother and promised to repay me little by little from his salary and bonuses. I apologized to my husband for fighting with my mother-in-law on the first day of living together, told him that I would apologize to her reluctantly, and headed to her room. When I apologized to my mother-in-law, saying, "I'm sorry for speaking out of turn earlier," she said, "You are the type of person who wants to complain even about small things. But remember, you won't get off lightly if you defy me again." She seemed to forgive me for this incident. The next morning, I was woken up by my mother-in-law at 4 a.m. She told me to go to the bakery in the neighboring town, which opens at 5 a.m. to buy bread. Given what had happened the day before, I replied yes and decided to head to the bakery. I wanted to take my bike, but I couldn't find the key. Thinking that the key might be on the bike, I went outside, but the bike wasn't where I had left it when we moved in. I assumed the bike had probably been thrown away too. I decided to run to the store for some healthy exercise. I changed into my running shoes and started jogging through the morning town, listening to my favorite songs on my headphones. It felt wonderful. When I returned after buying bread and tried to take a shower, my mother-in-law stopped me. "You don't work, so no wasteful spending. Just use a towel if you sweat," she said, throwing a towel at me. I thought she must still be upset about yesterday and gave up on taking a shower. I prepared breakfast for my parents-in-law and husband, consulting the contents of the fridge. Since I enjoy cooking, I can decide on the menu just by looking at the ingredients in the fridge. Although the ingredients were limited, I was able to prepare breakfast, so I woke up my husband and informed my in-laws that breakfast was ready. When my parents-in-laws and husband sat down at the table, I was about to join them when my mother-in-law said, "You can't eat with us. You are the daughter-in-law, right? You should eat after we're done cleaning up." And she didn't let me have a seat at the table. I looked at my husband's face, but he pretended not to notice and didn't look at me. Are the rules of this house from the early 1900s? I thought, but still followed my mother-in-law's orders. When my husband left, he mouthed sorry to me, put his hands together and bowed. I couldn't help but chuckle a little. Then I thought, I need to make this a home my husband wants to return to, even if he doesn't show much consideration. I told my mother-in-law I'll start with cleaning and began to clean. She was sitting on the sofa, glanced at me, but didn't reply. Since she was there, I left the living room cleaning until last, and in the meantime, I was busy with laundry and cleaning. Finally, only the living room was left to clean, but when I went there, my mother-in-law was not there. When I finished cleaning and was about to have tea, I noticed that the small window next to the fridge was open and I could hear my mother-in-law's voice. It seemed like she was having a conversation with a neighbor. As I was casually drinking my tea and listening to their conversation, it seemed like they were talking about me. She was saying that I had taken her bank book and she didn't have any money to spend freely. Unable to stand it, I confronted my mother-in-law when she came in and said, "Please don't lie to the neighbors. When did I ever take your bank book?" My mother-in-law quickly shut the small window next to the fridge, shouting, "Just do whatever you want," before storming off to her bedroom. I decided to make an effort to bridge the gap with her from now on, as I didn't want my husband to be stuck uncomfortably between her and me. However, she treated me as if I were not there. Even when I tried to talk to her, she ignored me as if I were invisible. My father-in-law also existed like thin air, unable to oppose his assertive wife. He is a quiet man who runs an animal hospital but has slowly started to talk with me. After a while, I was able to have a long conversation with my father-in-law on a Wednesday, the day his clinic was closed. I've been told by her that it's okay to divorce, he confessed. I responded with a laugh. She's not serious. If she's still with you, perhaps she's testing your love. You are loved, aren't you? We ended up sharing our complaints with each other in a light-hearted way. It felt like I had an ally behind the scenes, and my father-in-law was my only solace. Thanks to him, I never complained about my mother-in-law to my husband. My mother-in-law, however, seemed to be venting about me to my husband. Whenever I heard these complaints from my husband, I would say, "I'm sorry, I'll be careful," to reassure him. No matter how much I was ignored by my mother-in-law, I persisted in my household duties without cutting corners. Still, she continued to treat me as if I were here. I was also getting along well with the neighbors. Amidst all this, my husband's work became busier, and he had to travel more often. When my husband was away on business trips, the prospect of spending more time alone with my mother-in-law was depressing. During the occasional phone calls from my husband, I reassured him that I was getting along peacefully with his mother. I genuinely wished that one day I could get along with her. So even though I was treated like air, I never stopped trying to engage her in conversation. I believed that the only way to build a good relation with her was to show her who I was going to be. So I pushed myself to do my best in everything. I had been getting up early and running to the bakery since the first day of our marriage. Before I knew it, 3 years had passed since our wedding. My mother-in-law continued to treat me and my father-in-law as if we were air, and I kept talking to him whenever she wasn't around. Then, one day, my father-in-law spoke to me with a serious face. "Your mother-in-law is supposed to go on a trip soon," he said. "Depending on the outcome, I might leave this house." I tried to ask him what he meant, but he simply replied, "I can't tell you now," and left it at that. I felt so sad at the thought of him leaving that I started crying. He was the only one who was on my side in his family, who comforted me and who listened to my complaints. "Maybe you should leave this house too," he suggested, looking at me in the eyes. I asked him what he meant, but all he said was, "I can't tell you yet." No matter how many times I asked, he stubbornly refused to tell me, simply saying, "I promise, I'll tell you when the time comes, so please wait a little longer." So I decided to trust him and wait until he was ready to talk. Then, the day when my husband would return home from his 2-month-long business trip was decided. It had been a long business trip, but I was glad to think that we would finally be able to live together again. The night before his return, I received a phone call from my husband. I immediately picked up the phone. Then, it wasn't my husband on the line, but a woman with a sweet voice. "Nice to meet you. Are you John's wife?" "If by John you mean my husband, yes," I answered, to which she cheerfully responded, "Yes, that's right, John. I'm Olivia, John's girlfriend. I'll give him back to you tomorrow, okay?" "What exactly is your relationship with him? Could you please explain it again?" "Like I just told you, I'm his girlfriend." "So, you're the other woman he's seeing?" "No, I'm his girlfriend, and we're planning to get married." Olivia, the woman on the other end of the line, answered with a hint of annoyance. Whether it was due to her being drunk or just her personality, I couldn't tell, but her way of thinking seemed immature. "I see. How did you meet?" I'm a temporary worker at Joan's company. Every time she spoke, she laughed. I had an intuition that this Olivia would say anything if provoked, so I decided to egg her on. My husband John has been out of your care. He's told me he won't be going on business trips anymore. So I'm looking forward to our married life together. No more business trips? John told you that? Yes, we're talking about a child recently. We've been discussing it together. Oh, how embarrassing. That can't be true. I'm pregnant with his child. I was taken aback upon hearing that Olivia was pregnant with my husband's child. You know, your mother-in-law doesn't even recognize you as her daughter-in-law, right? Why don't you just get a divorce? Hearing Olivia mention my mother-in-law, I snapped back to my reality. Did my mother-in-law say something like that? Oh dear. I laughed off the question, not knowing how to respond to the topic of my mother-in-law. Olivia, perhaps feeling mocked, retorted angrily. Have you ever been on a trip with your mother-in-law? I have, and it was fun. The four of us. At this, she sent a photo via line. Looking at it, I saw my husband and mother-in-law in special clothing for vacation. A woman who appeared to be Olivia and a man around my husband's age. When I asked, "Who is this man?" she replied, "Oh, I can't tell you that. We all have our little secrets, you know? Hey, are you jealous? Are you jealous that I'm close with John, your mother-in-law?" I thought to myself, these people are disgusting. So, you just happened to meet on vacation, right? I'm not jealous at all. We are a married couple after all. Olivia sent me dozens of photos of her and my husband without saying a word. I immediately saved them all. Among them were a few photos of my mother-in-law and a man looking intimate. This is hardly proof of an affair, I said. My husband would never betray me. Well, thank you for your time, I said, pretending to end the call. Wait a minute. I'll show you more proof. Just wait. I waited in silence. Then she sent me screenshots of her line conversations with my husband. There were several of them, and I saved all of them. Then I said goodbye and hung up. As soon as I hung up, I burst into tears. Despite my belief in him, despite thinking I was loved, despite believing he was on my side, despite my love for him, a surge of emotions overwhelmed me. The confident me, who had been provoking Olivia just a while ago, was gone. I rushed out of the house and headed for my father's workplace. I flung open the door to his office and asked tearfully, "Where is my dad?" It seemed he was busy, so I waited alone in the waiting room, crying. After a while, my dad came to see me during his break. I immediately apologized to him for my sudden arrival and told him everything. My father said, "You are like me. You can't stand injustice." And with a smile, he added, "You know that crying won't solve anything, right?" These were his words that, since my childhood, had always encouraged me to move forward after I had finished crying. I showed him the screenshots of the conversation and the photos I received from Olivia. My father, looking at them, exclaimed, "What the hell are these?" When I picked at the screen of my smartphone that my father was looking at, I saw a picture of my mother-in-law and a man beside her. My father expressed his wish to talk to my father-in-law. As it turns out, my father is a lawyer. He appeared to be quietly angry, which is not like his usual calm self. When I returned to my house and told my father-in-law that my father wished to speak with him, he went into his bedroom and seemed to make a call. After the call, my father-in-law informed me, "I'll be meeting with Camilla's father." The next day, I greeted my husband, who returned from a business trip with an aunt's charming face. My husband probably hadn't heard anything from Olivia because there was no change in his behavior. My mother-in-law returned a little later from her trip. "I'm tired, but it was fun," she said, handing me souvenirs from the same area where my husband had been. And as always, the three of them ate the food I had prepared, excluding me. As I quietly observed this scene, my husband spoke to me. "Camilla, the atmosphere seems to have changed while I was away. You seem cooler," he said. Immediately, my mother-in-law chimed in. "Maybe she's sulking because you were away on business and she wanted your attention," she tossed out without even looking at me. I was about to say something unnecessary, so while I nodded with a smile, I was trembling with anger. My father-in-law made eye contact with me and, "Calm down." I nodded, took a deep breath, and suppressed my emotions. Then my mother-in-law started saying things that disrupted my attempt to stay calm. "You've been living with your father for a while, haven't you?" she asked. "Something happened, didn't it? I can tell. Don't hide it. Tell me," she said, insinuating there was something more than just a normal parent-child relationship between my father-in-law and me. "What do you mean by something happened?" I asked, suppressing my anger. "A relationship between a man and a woman, right? It happened, didn't it?" she repeated. "That's impossible," I retorted, my voice trembling. Normally a quiet man, my father-in-law said with a stern face. "Did you go on a trip hoping that Camilla would get into a relationship with me?" He stared at her as he said this. "If nothing happened, you wouldn't be angry, right? So are you admitting it?" she asked. My father-in-law replied, "I despise you. I truly despise you. I can't forgive you as a person." He then got up from his seat and left, saying, "I'll be at the clinic for a while. Don't contact me." My father-in-law said to me, half smiling, "You can leave too, you know." I stared at my husband. My husband glanced at me with fearful eyes, sensing my stance. Saying this, my mother-in-law said, "What? Do you have a problem with John? You're so arrogant. That's why I don't want to talk to you. You should go to your father's animal clinic too." Trying to force me out, my husband did nothing to stop her. I asked my husband, "John, don't you have anything to say? This is the exact situation I talked about before we got married, isn't it? What happened to 'I'll protect Camilla if my mom does anything to you'? I said I wanted to reconsider our marriage because I didn't want this to happen. But you stopped me." My husband seemed surprised that I was angry. Upon saying this, my mother-in-law said, "Well then, you should break up. Get out." I asked my husband, "Is that okay with you?" But he didn't answer and just held his head in his hands. "It means you should leave. John is just too kind to say it," she said. I stared at my husband and asked one last time, "Is that okay?" No response means it's okay, right? My husband said, "I need to think. Give me time." And then he went to take a bath. That night, I didn't wash the dishes, didn't take a bath, and just went to sleep in the bedroom. The next morning, I got up earlier than anyone else, didn't make breakfast, and headed to my parents' house. After arriving at my parents' house, I used my spare key to get inside and took a shower. My mother woke up when she heard a sound and seemed surprised to see me in the room. My father also woke up, and when he saw my face, he said, "Good morning," and went into his study. When my father came out of the study, he handed me an envelope. I looked inside. As I looked at the contents, I told my parents that my mother-in-law had told me to leave and that my husband hadn't responded. After looking at the contents of the envelope, I asked my parents, "I can't be with my husband anymore. Can I come home My parents smiled, nodded, and said, "Come home." I bowed silently and looked up. Seeing my face, my father said, "Calm down. Your face looks like a demon's," and patted my shoulder. I think I had turned into a vengeful demon after looking at the documents in the envelope. I think it was because my husband's betrayal, the unwarranted harassment, and verbal abuse from my mother-in-law was swirling in my head with images. I started to feel a strange sense of enjoyment in this situation as I took deep breaths and said, "This is going to be the ultimate revenge." In the afternoon, my father and I went to my father-in-law's animal clinic, which was closed for the day. When my father-in-law saw me, he called out to me. "Are you okay, Camilla?" he asked, worrying whether I had been able to sleep or eat. I just answered, "I'm fine." Seeing my face, he smiled and seemed relieved. From there, my father, who is a lawyer, and my father-in-law and I had a discussion. And we decided to take action the next day. First, I called my husband during his lunch break and we agreed to meet at a dinner after work. My husband arrived at the seat where I was waiting, panting. "Why didn't you answer the phone even though I called many times? Where were you? What happened?" He bombarded me with questions. I took deep breaths as my father had told me, trying to stay calm. "I'm sorry for leaving without telling you. I was just wandering around town. You should know what happened better than anyone else," I said, pretending to be a brave woman with a smile, even as my eyes welled up with tears. Today, I needed to act like a great actress towards my husband. I pretended to hold back tears, turned my back, and dropped eye drops in one eye. My husband misunderstood and thought I was crying for him, murmuring, "Sorry." When he thought he heard a message from me, who had left home and opened our group chat, he seemed to think I'd been caught because there was a call history and many photos that I got from Olivia. With a very flustered expression, my husband said, "I did meet her, but nothing happened. I only love you, Camilla. If you are angry that we met, I won't do it anymore. Please forgive me." A storm of lies and apologies. I brushed off my husband's hand, trying to hold mine, and said, "I love you too, but..." Holding the handkerchief to my eye, pretending to cry, my voice trembling, I said a little excitedly after saying, "Olivia has your child in her belly, doesn't she?" Then I said it quietly, "Don't make the child suffer. This is my last request." And I fully played the part of a brave woman who loves her husband but steps back because his mistress is pregnant. My husband apologized many times, saying, "I'm sorry," and, "But I only love you, Camilla. That will never change," crying and spouting cheesy lines. He seemed to feel more guilty than necessary and said he would give me all his savings and also pay me $2 million in damages. It seems his intention is to make sure I don't suffer even if we divorce. I called my dad, had him fill out and stamp the divorce papers, and after drafting the pledge, had him stamp that as well. My husband apologized to my father, but my father said, "My daughter has been a burden," and left the diner with me. I headed straight to my in-laws' house and packed my things. Most of it had been thrown away by my mother-in-law, so all I had was one large bag. My mother-in-law came and asked with a half smile, "Finished moving?" So I said, "I'm leaving now. Thank you for everything," and headed lightly to my parents' home. As I was unpacking and tidying up at home, my cell phone rang with a phone call again. I had a hunch it was a gloating call from Olivia. Sure enough, the call was from Olivia.
"How does it feel? Loser? Ex-wife? I'm on top of the world. There's no one I can't have, right?"
She began with predictable gloating. I calmly said, "I'm glad for you. Best of luck."
"You told him I love you, didn't you?"
I requited love, huh? Good for you. I'm hurt. I think a letter will arrive for you, Olivia, later. Please take care of it, I said and hung up the phone. As I thought about what would happen next, I was excited. I couldn't wait to see the final state of the scenario my father had thought up. A few days later, I received a payment for damages from my ex-husband and Olivia. Normally, this would be the end, but in my case, it wasn't. A few months later, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. I got a frantic phone call from my mother-in-law. Because of you, the house is in chaos. Come back and do something about it. And what's this certified mail about? Pretending to know nothing, I said, I haven't done anything. What happened? Please tell me calmly. My mother-in-law was in a panic and couldn't calm down. If you can't talk, I'm going to hang up. We're strangers now, I said, and she started to explain one by one after saying, Wait. First of all, my husband and Olivia got married last month. However, Olivia already had 4 children and moved into my in-laws' house with them. Apparently, the house was in chaos because of the undisciplined children and Olivia, who did not do housework or take care of her children. My ex-husband was in a panic saying, I didn't know she had 4 children. The damages to me were reluctantly paid by my mother-in-law, who was looking forward to having a grandchild. After Olivia said, I'm going to give birth to your grandchild, so you pay instead. Next is a certified mail from me to my mother-in-law. This was a certified mail about the repayment of the $1 million she had used from my savings without permission. When I asked my father, Aren't we family? Can't we sue? He smiled and said, Anyone can sue. My mother-in-law was scared by the certified mail and said, I'll pay, so don't sue. I agreed, saying, If you will return it. I was also able to hear about Olivia's situation. Apparently, my ex-husband was going crazy because he said in front of Olivia that he wished he hadn't cheated and wanted to get back with me. My ex-husband, crying out my name, his hysterical wife, and their unruly children had my mother-in-law saying, I'm going to lose my mind. In the end, she told me that she had received a divorce notice from my father-in-law and was also being asked to pay damages for the affair. My father, who found out that he was my father-in-law's lawyer, tried to persuade me to somehow stop the divorce. Upon hearing the current situation of my in-laws' house, I realized that things had ended just as my father's scenario had predicted. Both my father and I, as well as my father-in-law, knew from the reports from the detective agency that Olivia had 4 children. Moreover, my ex-husband may not know this, but there is a possibility that the child in Olivia's belly is from a colleague of my ex-husband, who she was seeing at the same time. Olivia's parents were taking care of the 4 children, but when they found out about her marriage to my ex-husband, they told her to take the children with her. In addition, they disowned Olivia when they found out about the affair. Therefore, no matter what happens, Olivia will cling to her in-laws' house. It seems that the time has come for me to deliver the final line of the scenario. You all reap what you sow. Goodbye, I said, and was able to end everything by blocking and rejecting incoming calls. After that, I found a job and started living alone near my parents' house. My father-in-law expanded his veterinary clinic and turned it into a residence. I was impressed by his words when I went to check on him. I might be happier with animals as my family, he said, seeming to live happily with his newly adopted corgi. Seeing the pitiful endings of my mother-in-law, ex-husband, and Olivia made me realize that I should be nice to people.